right. Good afternoon, good evening. Depends
Hello.
on where you are. Good morning, if you're far enough west. This is Robert Vaughn, and I have Alex Jewell, and this is the DeFi Collective. On this show, we talk about decentralized finance, cryptocurrency, NFTs, digital wallets, the social implications, digital data, the data standard, the gold standard. So anything that's concerns digital and crypto, we discuss on this show. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about NFTs, briefly about digital wallets, and then we're going to talk about the data standard a little bit. Because unless you've been in solitary confinement the last 10 years, things are kind of moving from the gold standard to the data standard, and we'll get into that a little bit and explain it. First, we're gonna start off with NFTs, and I'll give a quick definition. Then I'm gonna let Alex hop in because his pseudonym is Mr. NFT, But you'll see why in a minute. An NFT, or a non-fungible token, is a unit of data on a digital ledger that represents a unique digital item and provides proof of ownership of what's called a non-fungible token. NFTs are not mutually interchangeable. Excuse me. One NFT does not have a certain unit of measurement like one $100 bill. So one NFT is not equal to one NFT. They're unique. They're commonly created by uploading files such as the digital artwork to an auction market. This can also include recordings, virtual real estate, and anything that can be digitized and uploaded to an auction marketplace could be an NFT. And it's referred to as a crypto asset. And again, each token is unique. And because each one is unique, they can be used to authenticate ownership, like artworks or recordings. And the price or the value is determined by what someone's willing to pay for it. Just to give you an example, there was a video, a 10-second video by a gentleman named Beeple that sold online for $6.6 million last month. And you say, well, a 10-second video, well, it doesn't sound like a lot, but if you had a Honus Wagner baseball card, that's sort of it's not a digital asset, but it's a non-fungible token. It's just a piece of paper, but it's worth a lot of money because someone was willing to pay for it. Same thing with this. Also, in February, a collage of digital artwork by an artist named Mike Winkelmann sold for $69 million. You say digital artwork that exists in the digital sphere, it's not tangible. It's not a painting, a Monet. It's digital artwork. But to someone, it was worth $69 million. And it's kind of like, stock sometimes, when you have, like we had a short squeeze with, what was the company a couple of weeks ago? But anyway, yeah. GameStop. And, and it makes the price higher than what it really is. It's like, I think another stock is like Tesla. People pay more for it than it's really worth, and it doesn't really make money.
That's what a PE ratio is, right? It's literally looking at, we don't have the tangible assets of this company yet, but we're going to value it at 700 times, right?
Yeah. So that's what an NFT is. And Alex, you want to elaborate on that a little bit and maybe sort of talk about not so much the nature, but the significance of NFTs in society today, particularly in the economic sphere.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I think it's hard, especially even for millennials, to grasp the full concept of digital assets being this valuable, right? But you ask anybody who's spent some money on Candy Crush, for example, to get level ups or whatever, and it's pretty clear that people have no problem spending money in the digital space, right? How much have people spent to download music before, or to stream music? How much do we pay every month to stream music? So clearly we care about, non-tangible things. I mean, how much money do people spend, especially, previously, how much did people spend to watch movies, right? You can't hold a movie. So obviously you can hold like a Blu-ray or DVD, you can put that back in, but still there's plenty of times where we spend money on experiences. We spend money on things that are not tangible, that we can't take home with us.
Right.
And so this is not some new concept, right? To spend money and value things that aren't necessarily, a baseball card. But what's interesting about a baseball card, for example, is that a baseball card is a tangible thing that's not necessarily valuable outside of what we've decided is valuable about it.
Right.
So even that economic concept is not unique.
Right.
All of this is merging in digital space because the lines between our physical and digital world are clearly blurring. You look at younger generations and they're on Roblox or like different things on their, virtual reality spaces and games. And they don't really care about the difference between the digital and the physical as much as we did. And that's like really significant. So, from an economic perspective, the question comes down to, well, why blockchain? And I think for me, the big, if I had to reduce it to something, it's ownership, right? Think about all the things you own. How many different formats are your records of ownership in? Where are they stored? Are they secure? Is there a standard protocol for ownership, right? Or is everything different? How do you keep track of everything?
Right.
Well, these are major problems, right? A lot of the things that we own are not technically owned, right? Your house is owned by the bank. So these are problems. Blockchain, and why blockchain? Blockchain gives us a permanent record. It's verifiable. It's contractual, and there's no middlemen. So, and it's completely transparent. And so this is huge. This is sort of groundbreaking to have all these things without some sort of trusted organization or institution in the middle. This is something we've talked about pretty extensively. And so what are some of the use cases? Where are these industries that this is going to affect? Well, obviously fine art and digital art. This is where it's already happening for NFTs. You're having tons of artists, famous artists, put up pieces that are NFTs and they're selling for a bunch of money. So video game and VR assets, like we talked about, imagine being able to, like, say a game shuts down or you're leaving a game, you're going to a new game, you're into some new virtual reality space. Imagine packing up your digital assets and taking them with you. So like, let's say you have a favorite crossbow on one game, you can take that favorite crossbow to another game, in this future ecosystem of things where you own the things that you're carrying with you. You mentioned music. Music's going to be huge, right? Because even in the modern age, where streaming just is extremely damaging to the artist. Record labels are extremely damaging to the artist. At the end of the day, artists have gotten the shorter end of the stick every single time. Even independent artists who still have to rely on these streaming services that are, mostly fake streams. There's these pools of streams that they get made a cut from. It sucks because they need them, but they don't get paid enough from them.
Just to interject here for a moment, the largest revenue source for the past 3 years for all your major labels and record companies has been streaming.
Mm-hmm.
The smallest revenue source for a long time for your artists has been streaming. So streaming creates revenue. It's just that the artists never see it because of the middleman, which is the label. And if you take the label out, and tell me, well, if you want to hear Drake's new song, it'll cost you half a cent every time you listen to it. Okay, I'm cool with that. Maybe I listen to it 10 times in a month. That's a nickel.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when Taylor Swift has a new song or Billie Eilish or whoever, and it would take the middleman out of the picture. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
You paid the money would go straight to the artist. Yeah, just tell our audience how that works, Alex.
Okay.
How it work, yeah.
So, this goes back to like the trust question, why have we had these middlemen, these large institutions that become, necessary evils in a sense, to help people be big or help people manage their money or whatever the case may be. A record label, in the case of music, is obviously that like centralized company that says, we're going to make you big. We're the ones that you have to rely on to get the exposure. And that puts artists in a very vulnerable situation because they obviously want to be successful. They want to be big and they want to grow their audience. And they don't necessarily have or had previously all of the resources they need to accomplish that on their own. And what blockchain does is it takes a lot of pieces of those types of relationships, not just in music, but for every type of artist and beyond. It takes the pieces of all those relationships and it removes the need for a middleman. All of the contractual terms and the governance, the complete record, indisputable, are all recorded transparently on the blockchain. Ownership is recorded there. Imagine royalties being a part of the deal. I minted my first NFT a couple days ago, and every time that NFT gets resold, I get 10% or 12% or whatever I set it to.
Now,
That's
for our audience,
recorded.
Alex, explain what you mean by minting an NFT, just so everyone
Sure.
knows.
Yeah, so the process of recording the NFT, recording the asset on the blockchain is just called minting. It's sort of like when you mint a unique dollar or a unique baseball card, I guess. You have to like make it, right? So the making of that permanent record onto the blockchain, you pay like a little bit of what's called gas, and that gas doesn't go to somebody. It's literally the cost on the network that it costs for miners to pick that transaction up and process it as part of the network. So that writes that permanent record now permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. The ownership that I have over that asset, no matter where it goes after this, it's permanently recorded as my asset that I created. And every time it gets resold, I get 12%. So that's, this is groundbreaking, right? Previously, you'd have to have lawyers and attorneys and like contractual terms. And like, I mean, it's just not that. Imagine all of the fees and money that you would have to put into just like maintaining that type of royalty agreement for the things that you created and you own. Obviously, you needed record labels and stuff in the middle to manage that relationship, to send warning letters to people and all this stuff. Now it's baked into the technology that we use, that all of us equally own. And that's like a beautiful thing to be able to make something that efficient too. It's not just a matter of like sticking it to the man. It's about efficiency. I mean, this is a way more performant way of handling governance because the asset is on the blockchain. The record of it is on the blockchain. My ownership is on the blockchain. The next owner's ownership is on the blockchain. And you don't need anything else to manage that. So it's also really for people who love things that are simple and efficient. That's what this accomplishes also.
And you could listen to who you want to listen to. It would be very inexpensive. You wouldn't have to listen to commercials because there'd be no need to monetize and waste your time. And eventually I could see this going to the visual medium too.
Mm-hmm.
But there will be a time sometime where the next generation of cable won't be cable, it'll probably be digitalized from the cloud. And if you want to see a movie, you pay a few cents to see the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you can watch it again if you want and pay a few more cents, or, if you've seen it, then that's it. Or you want to watch the news, maybe, MSNBC costs you 2.5 cents a day to watch, and there would be no middleman. And then the creator of the content, would receive compensation. And if you didn't want to watch it, you could watch it. You could switch the channel.
So this is the concept of semi-fungible. So my stream of something is semi-ownership, right? It's a semi-fungible token of my ability to stream something or experience something. And that's a really cool concept too. And even when you bring up advertising, this is actually a whole new world of how we think about advertising. And this is somewhat of an economic shift too. Imagine you being compensated when you watch an ad. Like, because your data, your response to the ad, where your eyes are when you watch the ad, all of these things are data for them in terms of how effective this advertising is. You just being advertised to should cost them money, and it normally does, but the wrong people get paid.
People get paid. Yeah.
We don't get paid for being advertised to, right?
Yeah.
We end up paying a lot. You know, when you subscribe to traditional cable, you're paying to be advertised to 20% of the time. I mean, that's mind blowing to me.
But they're double dipping. You're paying, then they're selling your data,
Right.
and then they're charging the person that advertises to you, because from the sale of your data, you're more of a targeted customer. They're not only can they predict we'll go to Dick's, but if you want to look up some interesting research, look up Facebook's or Google's, what was it, Pokemon? Pokemon was an experiment to see if they could lead people to certain areas and see if they could take someone like Alex out of his home and lead him to Dick's Sporting Goods.
Yep. Pokemon Go was
Pokemon.
They were getting money from
that. Everybody thought it was a game. Well, the game beneath the game was that they figured out how to not just influence your decision, but actually place you at Dick's Sporting Goods. And from geo mapping, when you got close, they say, oh, by the way, that workout suit you were looking at is 40% off through the end of the day.
Now that you're out being active, chasing Pokemon.
That's right, yeah. So the data that you're not being compensated for is what makes companies wealthy now. Ford Motor Company, you know, one of the executives said that they really didn't have to make money selling cars. And the guy says, what do you mean? He says, do you realize that we have millions of people and millions of data points every day that we can pick up from the car? You know, and that is a commodity that can be sold.
Yep.
You know, I mean, they can even, you know, if you listen to radio, they can, you know, if they know, you know, I like ice cream, you know, I get close to Mitchell's ice cream, well, I start getting, you know, Mitchell's ice cream commercials, or I get a coupon on my phone, you know, and I think everything's nowadays is interconnected, it's integrated, you know. So one thing the blockchain does, and one thing that NFTs do, it kind of accelerates taking the middleman out of the equation. And, and there's going to be a lot of resistance to that. But I think, you know, we talked about going from the gold standard to the data standard. Well, we're kind of like there, you know, we're kind of like there. Just a lot of people don't acknowledge it yet. But, you know, data, we live in a data-driven world now. And, you know, cryptocurrency, blockchain is just another, just something to go along with it. You know, so it's just a new platform that we're going to be operating on. Alex, you want to talk? Let's talk a little bit about the data standard. Sure. This concept. You know, we've been on the gold standard, and I guess, you know, with banking system, they took us off the gold standard. I think, didn't Nixon do it in 1970, I believe? And we went off the gold standard, and we went to a standard where securities, stocks, and bonds, speculation pretty much became the standard.
Yeah.
You know, and people found that, you know, having a certain stock was more valuable than having gold. You know, and now I think we're moving from the gold standard and the stock and standard or whatever to the data standard, because, you know, data, digital data is sort of like the next platform for an economic system, from where I see it. I'll just say this real quick. Economic systems are born, they have a lifespan, they die. Whether it was capitalism, slavery, mercantilism, feudalism, manorialism, they all last about 350 years, and then they just kind of play out, and capitalism is kind of like, I think it's on life support because government, originally in France, it was supposed to be laissez-faire capitalism where the government wasn't involved. And now it's like the government is capitalism, and it's happening more frequently. There was the dot-com bust, there was a real estate crisis, so the government is always having to step in and decide, what companies are going to survive and what companies aren't. What happens is eventually, every country well, capitalism is the world economic system now. And for it to really exist and be profitable, for you to have people at the top, you have to have people at the bottom. But the way it's designed, the people at the bottom can never get up to the top. It used to be they could get to the middle, but now it's even harder to do that. So I think another system, the digital standard, is there's no sense in resisting. I mean, it's pretty much here. Cryptocurrency is not going away. I know we talked this about before. I had a conversation with Verl, and we would always say, "Oh, it's $2,000, man. That is way too much for Bitcoin." Then it was like $8,000. It says, who's going to pay $8,000? And then it's $10,000, then it's $30,000, and then it's $35,000. I said, okay, time to get in. But it's if you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. The digital is here to stay. And that's just the nature of technology and the way the financial system is going. I think really to keep it solvent, and to have a more equitable, I guess I would say, I wouldn't say fair, I would say equitable system. Talk a little bit about the data standard, if you would, Alex.
Yeah. So, over time, we've clearly seen a shift to sort of the non-tangible, right? And really, especially with the tech boom, we saw the valuation of companies on things that we might not have ever imagined, right? The valuation of companies not based on revenue. In fact, a lot of the tech companies are not making a profit. Many of them intentionally, but they're not profitable. So why are they valued at 20 billion, 30 billion, 400 billion, right? Why? And at the end of the day, it's because they are valuable by a data standard. We're clearly moving into a world where our data is the standardization that other things are valued by, which other things are valued, right? The reason Facebook or Amazon are valuable is not because of cash. Yeah, they make money, but the moment that some of Facebook's advertisers pull out, or the moment that people shift from Amazon to something else, those companies are still going to have a very valuable data set that makes them, they may not have long-term viability at that point, but they're still going to be valued based on what they know, right? What these companies know is sort of a black box in many ways, but we're moving to a data standard where we value things even in our own lives based on what's known about them, what's the data, right? And that makes more sense for our life. For gold was not like, back in the day it was somewhat valuable. Today it's still valuable if maybe you're like a space engineer and you have to put gold on a you have to launch a rocket with some gold. But gold by itself doesn't really make sense as an asset by which to value a bunch of things. What made it valuable was scarcity at the end of the day. And so if we can recreate scarcity with data and decentralize the ownership of it, that'd be pretty cool. And so they did. And so that's how we ended up with, cryptocurrency.
21 million max.
Right, exactly. And we're not going to have all of them in circulation for another 100 years. It's baked in, it's built intelligently, right? And the gold standard and our previous economies were sort of just built on top of each other for the benefit of the people who made them. And so this is somewhat revolutionary to think about an economy that's not like born out of the destruction of like people in a desperate situation. It's not born out of like, oops, some rich people got in a room and drafted it. This is an economy born out of us being able in these last dying moments over the last 100 years of capitalism to say, what does the new economy look like? What is it going to have to look like? And when you see us losing so many jobs, hundreds of millions potentially, to automation over the next 30 years, then we're especially going to be in a situation where in maybe 50 years, we're going to have to take a serious look at our economy and our access to economy. Because, regardless of politics, which obviously these things are closely tied a lot, but regardless of politics, we're going to have hundreds of millions of people who have no access to a job, who are not being compensated for their data. And you have a bunch of tech giants with a very small group of people at the top that are profiting off of the bottom people. And what happened when last time this happened, right? When we had, 10% of the population that owned everything for the other 90%, well, we had the French Revolution. And so if we end up in that situation again, it's going to be very ugly if we aren't proactively preparing a new economy where we can better distribute wealth for the people who don't have the ability to work, but who are contributing greatly to our economy. Every time you walk into a store now, you're contributing to our economy by contributing the data of what you pick up and put down, of what you purchase. Every one of those decisions is lining somebody else's pocket, and you're the one spending money at the store. So we have to think differently about how you value things, how we think about what people are owed in the system. Because if we don't, it's gonna crumble, and that's gonna be way uglier than if we design something that maybe some people were uncomfortable with the concept of earlier on.
You will have more of a equity situation, more of an equilibrium, whereas now there's no pretense of there ever being equilibrium. Surveillance capitalism. We talk about data a lot. Surveillance capitalism is the acquisition of your data and the monetization of your experience to benefit Google or Facebook. Data, your data is acquired in a lot of different ways. If you have a Nest thermostat, there happens to be a microphone in there. If you have a Samsung TV, a smart TV, there's a microphone in there. So your data is acquired, I'd call it, surreptitiously without your knowledge. If you posted a picture to Facebook, if you've taken selfies, your facial expressions are digitized. What you say is digitized.
Your metadata is on there. People don't even realize that.
Yeah, and there are algorithms written to know how to get you to vote for someone.
Yeah.
For instance, or
and that can be gravely misused, right?
Yeah. So, it was always, I remember reading George Orwell's 1984, and it was always the government was this big boogeyman that was gonna, take your data and was gonna control everything. But it's not really the government, it's big business.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, where's the government end and where's big business begin? And they're kind of like one and the same now. Because the thing about economic systems, particularly capitalism, is they're also political systems. And the power lies not with, they're sort of anti-democratic by the very construct of the way they're constructed. So economic systems are, they're also political systems. So what happens is, if you are at the top of the heap in terms of data, and we live in a data economy now, is what I'm driving at. It used to be, where manufacturing was sort of the where the big money is made, Ford, steel, tires, glass, but now it's data, and so we're in a data economy. And the point was really driven home for me, because I, worked in the music business and still do. And one of the things that they do now is they project who's going to be a star before they really are. They say, oh, I remember hearing talk about Billie Eilish and Megan Thee Stallion years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I said, well, she's going to be a big star. I said, well, how do you know that? Well, if you look at, her data, and if you look at Beyonce's data. It's very similar at this particular point, and she has a lot of crossover, and she's got a big butt. She looks a little bit like a hippie, and if you add all those things up and put them in the algorithm, they actually project who's going to be a star before they actually are.
Yeah.
And people say, well, how can they do that? They can do it with data, and it's so certain that you can take the data, you can take your Spotify data and your Shazam data. Shazam is a very strong indicator. Somebody will Shazam your song. There's a 78% chance that they will buy it, because you have to go through 4 different operations. You have to take out your phone, you have to open Shazam, you have to Shazam it, and then you have to answer whether or not you want to buy it. Mm-hmm. So it's a 78% chance that you'll buy that song. And so a lot of times, people say, well, this crazy music and blah, blah, blah. Well, they created a situation where they not only can make music that most people don't like, but they can create a platform where enough people will buy it so they can make a lot of money, and that just boggles the mind. So a lot of the stars that you see now in pop music aren't stars because of their musicality. They're stars because they fit the protocols and the data and the algorithms,
Yeah. And then they shape them too. I mean, you look at Billie Eilish is a great example, because they had the early data indicators when she was like, 16?
Yeah.
And they created her along with other factors. They created a person based on their understanding of data that would for sure be successful, right?
Yeah.
And when you can control the world around you and you lose some of that organicness, I mean, obviously people have to realize, like, so much of the world around you is perfectly constructed around you spending money, especially online. I mean, you think about all the dark, we call it in the industry, we call it dark UX, dark user experience. It's the stuff you don't see, right? For example, this is a physical example. Say you go to the airport, okay, and you're like waiting at the terminal to grab like your bag. Well, they had a major problem with people getting too close to the baggage claim. Somebody couldn't see if their bag was coming. They couldn't get in to get it. And they kept, signs failed. They had signs everywhere, and people are like, I don't listen to signs. I haven't even seen the sign. And they're like, how do we, they've tried putting out security guards, but of course, like, a security guard can't be constantly pulling people back all the time, all day. So they got some, probably some civil engineers or something in a room, and they're like, how do we stop people from getting too close, going past the line to get their bag? And what they did is they slightly raised the floor and they put little spikies on it. And people just felt uncomfortable standing there, so they didn't. And these are the little things on the web and are in your digital world that you don't think about. For example, there's a previous company that I worked at. I won't say the name, but there's a previous company that I worked at. I'm a software engineer, and we were trying to raise the average amount that somebody spent on the site. And so you might have like a question on the side that was like, a sidebar filter that said, price range, and people might put in a price range that they're comfortable with in that. But let's say we had like a wizard at the top that had a question like, what quality such and such do you want? And that quality question directly related to the price of the items you saw. So in your head, you're like, oh, I want a higher quality couch or a higher quality logo or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And behind the scenes, you're spending 4 or 5 times more. And you're okay with that because now you're equating it to quality, right? These are basic little psychological things that you don't realize, that are constantly affecting where your money goes. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that people are directed towards things that they want to spend money on and they're happy. Maybe because there's people, companies care about how happy you are in that experience. The problem is that you don't know about it. The problem is that you didn't consent to it, right. Consciously. You signed some agreement at some point, but, you haven't consciously said, I understand how this works, and that's okay, because if you're helping me get to a higher quality thing, fine, right? But the problem is that a lot of this is a black box. We've talked about how a lot of the algorithms online, they're actual neural networks. And what that means, it's sort of like a brain surgeon. Okay. So the brain surgeon is maybe the company on one side, maybe some sort of, AI engineer. And the brain surgeon is like zapping a part of the brain, let's say. And in between, let's say that the patient's left foot stops working. Well, they have no clue what happened in the middle. All these
They don't care.
pathways and nerve endings, those have all been burned by a somewhat intelligent digital entity. And they can just they can turn knobs and manipulate things on one side, and you're affected by the things on the other side. And nobody has any clue what's happening in the body in the middle that's affecting us. Some of these things can have really negative effects. Look at Cambridge Analytica, right? The entire creation of the Trump right in America was not just because he was on a fake reality TV show they thought was real. The creation of Trump America was the manipulation of your data against you, and Facebook was useless in stopping that because they didn't even know how this data was being used and what was happening in the middle.
Right.
So really what blockchain gives us ownership again.
Yeah. And what it does, for instance, on Facebook, if you like something, then you'll see more of that. And typically what happens, it drives people to the extremes, and you're either over here, you're over there. And I think we can see that, and it's not just Facebook, it's all social media. Because of the surveillance capitalism and the data analytics that they use, it kind of drives people to the extremes. Because, and like you say, they really didn't know actually that was happening at first, and then maybe they did. But I talked to a pretty senior person at a social media company, and she told me, she said, a lot of times we didn't even know what the game was.
Yeah.
She was senior VP level. She said a lot of times many of us did not know exactly what was going on.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But I think cryptocurrency, blockchain, the use of data, the data standard is somewhat of an equalizer when it comes to surveillance capitalism. You want to touch on that a little bit, Alex?
Yeah.
When
sorry, you cut out in the question.
Oh, okay,
sorry.
okay. I was saying that the data standard, blockchain, cryptocurrency is somewhat of an equalizer or a neutralizer to surveillance capitalism.
Right.
And
yeah.
Go ahead and expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, so it goes back to that ownership concept that we talked about. What blockchain gives us is transparency, which we don't have with surveillance capitalism, right? We don't know what they're doing oftentimes until it breaks. It gives you ownership. It reverses that flow of like who owns your data and who's compensated for your data, right? It gives the opportunity for you to establish the contractual agreement to say, I should be compensated on some level for this. We have this now with like the Brave browser. The Brave browser is a Chromium browser. It's built on the same technology as Google Chrome, but Brave has a token called the BAT token. And when you're advertised to through the Brave browser, you're compensated in BAT. So it gives you that ownership again. So it starts redistributing the wealth in a healthier way of how our data is used. And it gives you full transparency over that, which is all that people want, right? I think most people understand the idea that their data is valuable to companies, right? But they don't know how, right? They don't know all these like little details about how much money people make off of knowing things about you that you don't even know. I mean, look at Tinder, right? Tinder will know what times a day you're more lonely. And they'll know like in your pictures, which room of the house you're in and what's in your room and what all that signifies in terms of how to market to you and like how to get you on the app more. I mean, you have no clue sometimes like how valuable your data is, even in a picture, the things that they can know about you. Yeah, so it brings transparency to all of that. And with transparency comes, active, people being active in terms of like asking of like, how can we establish this agreement so that I get what I am owed? You obviously as a company have to serve, there's still going to be companies in the future, but they're not going to be, we shouldn't have a situation where we're celebrating the fact that somebody may be a trillionaire by 2026 when most of his workforce by then will probably be robots. This is a major failure of capitalism that for a company that's mostly profiting off of our data. We're paying to make this guy a trillionaire. And at some point, he's not going to be even employing that many people. So how do we resolve this? We'll resolve this with a new economic system that's decentralized. It's fully owned by everybody.
And you almost, it's inevitable. I mean, it's inevitable because, one of the inherent conflicts in the capitalistic system is that, it tends to concentrate wealth. And one way to get wealthier is to pay people less. And you reach a point where, people are making $7.25 an hour, and the owner has a $500 billion or something. And, you have to say, well, what does it all mean for society? If you're a trillionaire, could you actually do more than you could if you had 100 billion or if you had 50 billion? In practical, sense, for the good of society, what does it all mean? And, one of the things I think a lot of people look for, whenever this comes up, and they say, well, where's the opportunities for creating revenue going to be? Well, it's going to be, I think, in crypto. It's going to be in NFTs. It's going to be in, if you can think about any business where you take the middleman out, that you will get more trickle down. You will get more money coming down. For instance, we go back to music a lot. An artist, and some artists are doing that themselves now. Like Dave Matthews Band, and who was it? Someone just did a digital album.
Kings of Leon.
Kings of Leon, just did a digital album. And basically, the value of that album is what somebody's willing to pay for it. Martin Shkreli had an album done by the Wu-Tang Clan where he says, I just want the album. I don't want it to be released. And they said, okay, give us $1 million. Okay, well, it's worth a whole lot more now. So you could see a situation where there will be ownership of art. Like say maybe you want a Mona Lisa in your living room for a party you're throwing, so you have a screen or a frame, and you could rent the Mona Lisa a weekend or whatever, But I think a lot of the revenue opportunities are going to be in areas where you see the middleman coming out, and you have to ask yourself, where are those assets going to go now? You're
going to see more people who are engaged in the economy in ways that they wouldn't be able to before.
Right.
And I think that's key, right? Trickle down has never worked. They've been trying trickle down, even when they initiated like the strong trickle down we have right now during the Reagan time. I mean, when you watch them talk about it, they understood it was going to screw the middle class and the lower class. They knew that. Their dumb idea was like, well, maybe eventually if we help our friends out and they're good enough, and then it like trickles down. But that never happened, obviously, because now we're literally having a discussion about somebody who can become a trillionaire. And if half of his revenue, his lifestyle would be no different, but the 700,000 people that work for him would have a very different life, right? And this is the problem with capitalism, is that if we don't keep the free market in check, the problem is not the free market. The problem is that obviously we don't have anything to balance it out properly. And when you don't balance the free market out and you rely on trickle down fantasy that's never happened in decades and decades, even though they've pretended it's going to magically at some point. And they've even convinced a bunch of people that it will, right? How many people stick up for tax breaks for companies and the rich by saying, well, they employ people, but at what cost, right? those people sticking up for them are way closer to poverty than they'll ever be to being a billionaire. I mean, they don't realize, like, statistically speaking, they're probably going to be poor before they ever come close to even being a millionaire. And so they're out here like sticking up for the system simply because they've been told over and over and over again by the people who would benefit from it that, well, we're going to have to lay people off. We can't afford to do this. Well, yeah, you can't afford to do it if you're still going to be taking $20 million in bonuses every year, right? This is the inherent issue, is like, we should be way more upset about the fact that, like, teachers and nurses don't get paid more than we should, that, like, oh, if we raise the minimum wage to a living wage, then they're going to be getting paid the same as somebody flipping a burger. That's the problem in the system. You can't say, well, if you get paid $15 an hour, $17 an hour, well, what about paramedics now? We'll pay them more because cancer is a leading cause of bankruptcy in this country. That's a problem. Something's broken when somebody gets cancer and they have to make a financial decision of, like, is this worth treating? Right. That's a major problem for somebody's family. People should be ashamed at how broken that system is. And so what all gives us is the ability to, allow the better distribution of wealth, where you can get a flash loan without any sort of, like, prejudice or, like, institution deciding arbitrarily if you're okay to get a flash loan, and you can start a business, right? The access to economy is so important, and it's something that we haven't had in a very, very long time. And so this is why it's so important, regardless of politics. When you look at these things, something's broken, right? And how do we fix that? Well, I think that cryptocurrency and blockchain is really a good solution.
And we had a question. Someone asked a question. By the way, our email is the DeFiCollective@gmail.com. So if you have any questions or suggestions, it's the DeFi Collective, DeFiCollective, @gmail.com. Someone asked a question about the implications of blockchain on the delivery of medical care. Now, suppose you took the middleman out of there. You could have a situation
all 3,000 of them.
I mean, there's so many. You could have a situation where, a board certified surgeon would say, you know what, you've got a compound fracture in your leg. I'll fix it for $5,000. Right now, it may cost you $105. And he said, and that includes the whole thing. I've got my own hospital, or blah, 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 or I'm at this hospital. So I think in the delivery of medical services, this could really have an effect, particularly in the delivery of drugs, prescription drugs.
Yeah.
Because say, for instance, if the prescription drugs, if the government at some point says, you know what, prescription drugs is ridiculous. Like Scarelli what did he raise the price of insulin? Like something like 5,000% or something ridiculous,
Well, his was like the but it was like a drug that people rely on, and
it's like a drug people have to have,
Yeah. I worked in healthcare tech, and I know, like, we don't have to change very much about how much professionals are paid. We don't have to change very much about how much money hospitals make. Where a lot of money goes down the drain for absolutely no reason are in inefficiencies, because there's so much complex data that hospitals deal with that blockchain immediately solves. And then all of the middlemen that they employ to try to resolve these inefficiencies, which just blows my mind, right? Imagine that you're losing $300 million a year as a hospital system because of inefficiencies. And so you spend another $500 million a year on a bunch of middlemen to try to resolve that for you. I mean, it just cracks me up, because this is why the US system is so expensive, is because it's bloated and inefficient. It's not because our doctors get paid too much, and it's not because hospital systems are too profitable. In some ways they could be. But the real issues that we need to think about first are, how do we make this more efficient? And dealing with our data better is a great way to start, because you're going to save a ridiculous billions of dollars a year if you resolve some of these inefficiencies.
Right.
And of course, politically speaking, I think like a single payer system would also be way more efficient, because I mean, even in terms of like how I dealt with technology on that side,
Mhm.
we would have like there would be like hundreds of possible eligibilities just for Medicare. So I was looking at like having to create special logic around like different eligibilities in technology, and I was getting paid for that. Like different technology companies get paid to deal with the complexity of eligibility,
Mhm.
and you could remove all of those costs if you don't have to worry about eligibility differences that are very minor, like, oh, this eligibility can't see this part of the page or the app, but this eligibility can. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. We're all paying for that to be a very inefficient system and it's way too overcomplicated for absolutely no reason.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest problems is that economics dictate who gets health care, how much health care you get, and health care should be, I think, a human right.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people does, if you talk to someone with a lot of money, they really don't probably think about it too much. But if you talk to someone who has to make a choice between buying insulin or buying food or buying school clothes,
Right.
it gets a little more complicated. So I think that healthcare, I think everyone has to, that's probably one of the worst things that you would want to monetize is healthcare.
Yeah.
Because just like and here it is, capitalistic system again. Pretty soon, healthcare gets so expensive that the insurance companies won't be able to cut it after long, and the people at the bottom just won't be able to afford it. So there's nobody left to keep the system going. So far, the insurance companies have been keeping the system going because that's who pays for most healthcare. Is you pay a little bit, you get some insurance, and they pay for it, and they hope you don't get sick. But pretty soon,
why are they making hundreds of billions of dollars? Why did they make hundreds of billions of extra dollars during the coronavirus?
Yeah. Why did Amazon double what it was before? I mean, and that money came from somewhere, or it was money that could have gone somewhere that didn't. And I think regardless, of your situation, it's unsustainable. It's a society that's probably unsustainable for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that really has to be looked at.
Yeah. People have been lied to. I mean, they've been told that if we go in that direction, we're going to lose quality. It's going to be more expensive for the people who have some money. And none of that's true. It's going to, because when you remove all the inefficiencies that make these companies money, when we remove those, then it costs all of us less. More people have access to it. And the quality of the people we have working in the field does not change. In fact, the changes in logistics, the efficiencies that we add, will make their jobs way easier. And blockchain is a great solution to manage all of our health data in the middle in a very transparent and efficient way.
Because you probably know in a hospital, I used to work in a transplant unit of a major hospital in Cleveland a long time ago. And what used to boggle my mind was the amount of paperwork and records that they have. I mean, it's just unbelievable, the tons of paper that they have. And they have these long cabinets that's on this, they're like on a track where you slide them and you wind this one down and you go back to this one. And there's like rooms and rooms and rooms of this in addition to the digitized data. So I think anything that could help streamline that is gonna, because it's pretty expensive to maintain all that data. And I think
how much do you think they pay MyChart? There's like MyChart, which is what a lot of the hospital systems use. I don't think anybody wants to know how much MyChart licenses cost. And imagine if we didn't need that, right? If we didn't need a lot of these inefficiencies and these middlemen, it would actually cost all of us less, and everybody would be able to have access to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So didn't get to digital wallets today. Maybe that's a subject for next week. But I think, everybody with the economic system, it changes upon us. It's just that a lot of people have recognized it, and they're the ones out in front that are lining their pockets, and some people will resist it to the very end. Like some people still don't use banks, so it's by the time they want to use banks probably won't be here in the same form that they know now. You know,
Mhm.
but I think just briefly, a lot of the uh, opportunities, a lot of the revenue opportunities, it's going to be in data. The data standard. Think data, think cryptocurrency, think blockchain, and just think of where this is going and what companies do. I don't want to name any names, but there's certain uh, companies that develop platforms or have platforms to develop uh, blockchain products or contracts. And I see those companies as the ones that are going to be moving forward, you know.
Yeah.
And, with the music industry, I don't think the day's too far off where, Alex, he's played his guitar, or he plays a tune, and I want to listen to it. He puts it on a blockchain. He says, okay, it costs you a half a cent to listen to it. I said, okay, it's worth about 2 cents. So I'll listen to it 3 more times, and then somebody else will listen to it. But there's no label, so the money would go to Alex, the creator. And I
Yeah.
think once a lot of the kinks get worked out, you won't need advertising. You won't need. I hate to say you won't need the Grammys to build up artists. You know what I'm saying, to make everybody, oh, this is whose music you should be buying, and people will just kind of listen to music and buy what they want.
Mhm.
Because I would find that that's not a bad deal. If I could listen to a song, 3 songs for a penny or something, I could do that. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
That's a fair deal, because I know that the creator was getting compensated. So,
Right.
not just with music, but I think there'll be a lot of lot of revenue opportunities in many different areas. But I think the thing you want to keep in mind is that it's going to be data driven, and the companies or the entities that move in that direction are more than likely going to be the ones that are going to be successful and will be around for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any closing thoughts, Alex?
No, yeah, I think we really had I really enjoyed our discussion today. I think from an
Yeah,
economic perspective, we really dove into, understanding
right.
um why this matters, right? Why it's not just like, oh, I need to like, send somebody money, but it matters on a much bigger level too.
A much bigger scale. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And just keep in mind an economic system is also a political system. It's just that it's kind of been flipped on its head, where now the economic system controls the political system. But that could flip back around where the political system again is in charge of the economic system. And I
Yeah.
think you're going to see, legislation. You're going to see a lot of moves, particularly in the area of surveillance capitalism and data. Because this has got to be, um, companies will figure out a way to monetize it if they can, but it's going to have to be, there'll have to be some legislation, I think, that's going to move us in that direction. So
Yeah.
stay tuned. And again, this is the DeFi Collective. You can reach us at the DeFi Collective at gmail.com. Alex and Robert saying, have a great day. Our time is up, and we certainly appreciate the time you gave us of yours. But wear your mask, stay healthy, so you can benefit down the road. All right. Have a great day, folks.